Hey everyone, Remarkably You is a podcast. On this podcast, I interview my guests and try and unearth what is it that they did, their mindsets, their outlook, their practices, their rituals. What is it that they did to uncover their remarkableness and in turn build their personal brand. In this episode, I interviewed David. David's a co-founder and principal of Harbor International School, H.I.S. He started the school in Dehradun a couple of years back. And what's remarkable is that he started this school, this international school, in a place, Dehradun, Uttarakhand, India, which is known for its schools, which is got so many legacy schools, 100 years, 150 years old, international schools, you name it. And he started it in this place, and not just started it, but it's also turned out to be pretty successful. It's been very meaningful for parents, for teachers, and students. In this episode, we bounce around all kinds of places. We talk about parenting, we talk about methodology of teaching, we talk about spiritual stuff. Sit back, enjoy, and have a good time. The pendulum syndrome, what does that mean to you?
Well, I use that term more, the pendulum effect, sometimes synonymously with the pendulum syndrome.
And this is your phrase.
It is my phrase. I came up with this, and so forgive me if this is very rudimentary, but it helps prove the point that I make. So in education, we're seeing a big shift, right? We're seeing a big flip, a movement from what's been there and where we're going into, right? And H.I.S. takes that place of trying to be in the forefront of this change. And I know there are many others who are doing this too, but there's a mentality that I often come across, and it's like a ricochet mentality, where we've got something on one end of the pendulum, and we're so frustrated and tired by the outcomes of that. So the obvious escape and the solution to that problem looks like we got to be on the other end of the pendulum, right? So the response and the reaction is to go to the other extreme in that spectrum. In that response, what we realize is that we are on the opposite side and not at a neutral position. We're not at a place where things are balanced, right? And so I come across this mindset very often in education, where parents are like, I need something new for my kid. I know what has been done is not necessarily producing the same outcomes as it did. The relevance of it has changed. And so the ricochet is happening that, okay, I'm done with my kid being stressed and having pressure and carrying these heavy backpacks and working only towards metrics and marks and scores and just chasing a system, so to speak. And so the opposite reaction of that is, how do I get all of that off of my kid and then give them a complete freedom? So we depend on child development to drive education. We depend on freedom to drive education. And there's a danger in that. We're on the other extreme of the spectrum. We're not at normal. We're not at neutral. And that's where I use the pendulum effect to help parents understand that often looking at it that way is not where you will find balance. You will not find thriving environments, right? The place where the pendulum is at its rest and its perfection is in the middle, right? That's where it can fall into a place where it can be neutral. And so that's what H.I.S. and Harbor International School is after. Is we're not necessarily saying, hey, we just break the norm for the sake of it, but how do we purposefully introduce something that's going to answer this need? So that's kind of how I explain the pendulum effect and the syndrome that often people have, is that the opposite is better, but often that's not the case. It's trying to find a good balance.
It reminds me of when you're in the shower and you're looking for hot water. Okay, so you're turning the knob and it's too hot, and whoa, what do? You instinctively just swing it to the other side, right. And then it's too cold. Right. But then you kind of calibrate and come to the middle, and from that metaphor, what I'm seeing is that you're kind of acting as the coach to help parents calibrate and come to a healthy mean, and not just swing to the either side of it, because that's kind of unhealthy. Yeah. H.I.S., that's the school you started, Harbor International School, right? It's in Dehradun, and Dehradun, Uttarakhand, India, is known for its schools. It's known for its schools 150 years old, 100 years old, and stuff like that. It's a swamped marketplace. How did you think of coming into this marketplace, starting up over here? What about the competition? You're saying, you're going up against these big granddaddies and grandmommies out there. Did you think about it, or and even if you're saying forget legacy schools, even if you're saying international schools, you've got a whole bunch of international schools over here. So I think what I'm saying is, do you see them as competition? What's your outlook to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for the longest time, I wrestled with this that people don't know about. A year before we moved back to Dehradun, that was one of my questions. Why do we need another school in Dehradun, right? And I've been born and raised here, so I understand exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. So for me and Donna, and who are co-founders of the school, the journey has been, as much as it has been to respond out of a need, it's also been very spiritual for us. Like, there has been this element where our faith has led us to respond in the way we have done. We haven't necessarily thought of this whole move as a strategic plan. There wasn't a great business plan that was being put together where we were, doing the pros and cons and whether or not. It was actually, in fact, both of us were not even thinking of moving back here. We had a very different, almost opposite direction that we were headed in. But it was our spiritual journey that led us to this direction, where we realized, okay, God's leading us here, and there's a purpose to that leading. Many things happened after that as a result, but that was kind of the trigger. That was what catapulted us to explore this, right? But when we actually moved here and we started to do what we're doing, one of the realizations we had, and my mentor, I was having a conversation with him, and I said, like, I'm struggling to see the value of making this decision because there is no strategic weight in what we're doing. So he gave a great example, and he comes from the food and the hospitality industry. And he said, David, have you ever noticed how when a really good restaurant starts and is launched at a place, you will often see very good other restaurants also come around it. Then you see a hub of restaurants.
Right.
Why does that happen? Are they fools to start their restaurants next to this competition?
Whoa.
Actually, it's because that's where all the foodies go.
Yeah.
Right? So they place themselves strategically there because they know that's where all the foodies are going. So we've got to get in that spot to have the maximum market that we can. So though that wasn't the intention for us, like I said, for us, that catapult was a very spiritual journey. This made sense too. Like, strategically, it made sense for us to be in a place where there is a demand for education, where there is a tension almost that keeps us on our toes to be excellent. Right? So it stems more than just from our value of being excellence driven, but also there's a design around us that leads us to it. Coming to your question of international schools, the word international brings a lot of images in people's mind in our nation, and for us, the word international was to truly reflect what that actually means. So it wasn't just to create this elitist mentality. It wasn't to create a bubble of people that exist in a almost foreign land. It was really to bring together people from all walks of life, all different nationalities, different cultures, different languages, and to have a true international school in its staff, in its student body, in its parent community, in its curriculum, and its culture. Yeah. So for us to pursue this was not just like, how do we get a name that attracts people, but rather a practice that is genuine to what we believe in. And so we didn't come here to compete with the international schools, and there's so many. And I don't know, but I think that we are unique in the sense that we're the only ones that in this kind of region that offer this diversity in all of those 5 different aspects. And to really say that this is a truly international experience and a place to be. So yeah, we never thought of competition. We actually don't even think too much about competition. I am driven by the call that I have in my heart, the vision that's there in my mind. And I'm not necessarily focused on my competitors, right? So I got to do what I do best. right? And I have to stop focusing on what others are trying to do best. Now, there's learning, definitely. There's motivation, there's challenge, there's encouragement. There's people who have done it before us. There's wealth of knowledge for me to gain and have, and to really bring that into our school and see from what has been done. But it's not with the intention of like, I gotta get in the front. I gotta be in the front and the top of it, because that is a very arbitrary term, right? Like, I want to be my best, and I want to do my best, right? So doing the best and being my best is very different from being the best. Right? Because the best is so arbitrary. You don't know what the best means until someone else comes and does it better than you, and then you're no more the best. So really, is the best even a benchmark? I don't think so. In my belief, it's like whatever we do it to the full potential of what we want to do and the conviction that's in my heart. And then I do my best to follow through with that. And so that's kind of the design of why we are here and what we do. You know, I see other schools and I look at them and I praise them and I say, this is good stuff you're doing. Keep doing it the best you can. Right? I'm not here to steal, compete, or do any of that. I'm here to do and follow what I believe my faith and my God led me to do, but also to fill a need that I've realized clearly exists in this part of our country. So yeah, that's where it is, and that's how it's kind of come to existence in many ways.
I've been taking notes as you're speaking, and there's lots and lots of places we can go. I see very clearly you're driven by a purpose, and I see very clearly something extremely different from what most people are doing, is that purpose is stemming from a spiritual place. And what you've also done, and I see these dots coming together, what I see you've also done is, in a way, you've created a tribe of people, and there's so much research out there about people really trying hard and not getting it right. But that's what I see you've done. You've actually created a tribe of people which is very diverse, very inclusive, and that's one of those driving values that I see. And what this is doing, as I'm speaking to you, this thought comes to me, is that what this is doing is, it's also serendipitously probably made your niche. So even though you're sitting in a place which is, flooded, rife with schools, all kinds of schools, the best, the creme de la creme. But even in that space, you've managed to create a niche for yourself. That's something that comes to my mind. You've spoken about, as you were speaking, you were talking about how you were catapulted, and the role that God and the spiritual aspect played in that movement. So if I just take that metaphor a little further and see the catapult. So the catapult also, implies pulling back the stone, but then there is that moment of release, and then the stone is flying. So there is pull back, there is loading and all of that, but there is that moment of release where that stone is off. For you, what was that moment of release, that moment of truth when you said, hey, I'm going to do this, let's get it done? Because it's a tough thing, demands lots and lots of courage, among other things. So, yeah.
That's a great question. It takes me back to two particular incidents that's where I kind of, I was, my big yes came in those two moments. The first one was where we were on a vacation, and so me and Donna, my wife, she was
who's also the co-founder.
Who's also the co-founder. Yeah. So she and I were at a holiday. I don't remember where. This has been a couple of years. But we were sitting and we did not have any conversations between us about this topic. But when we got together to talk about what is it that we're wanting to do, what is it, this nudge that we feel we want to move towards and to respond to, there were two words that came out that were significant and instrumental to our yes. One word was seeing lives change, and the other one was transformation. And I love those two words because I believe somewhere deep down, all of us humans, no matter where we're from, we're trying to create, so to speak, a restored ideal garden for ourselves, right? The world doesn't quite offer that, right? We see that in the news, you open that up and it's just like far from that. But every product, every service that's out there, in some essence, there's parts of it which is trying to restore a garden for itself and say, this is our happy place, right? And so when we think of transformation and change lives, we're thinking of brokenness that's being eliminated from people's life. We're thinking of people's life that has patterns of failure and losses being turned into successes and profits and gains. We're thinking about lives being changed where people are genuinely finding a purpose for who they are so they can live their potential. So they can live a life that's meaningful, which is kind of the big phrase for me, is I want to live a life of purpose. Like there's no point for me to just live and do what I do unless there's a purpose behind it, because otherwise it's all for nothing, right? And so that was one moment. But the other one that I'll talk to you about was the vision that really took the name of the school, and we have the painting of it right here behind us.
Okay.
That our art teacher, she put it into a little bit of a flesh here, and this happened when we were still in Delhi, and there was a vision that I saw, and in that there were basically 4 ships. And in that 4 ships, I saw cargo ships. So if you can see, these are all carrying cargo. And the first ship actually came in with cargo to the port, to the seaport. And it was then,
there's a port over
there's right here, right?
Yeah.
So this is the first one that comes into the port, and it's being unloaded by people. And it was then sent out into the ocean again.
Right.
The second one was one that was empty, right? And it was brought into the port, and that was then loaded with fresh cargo and in shipping containers, as you can see, things like that, by people, and then it was sent out in the ocean. The third one was what you see, the red one, which is it's broken, it's falling apart, it's rusted, it's not fit to be on the ocean, and that was fixed, repaired, made to look new, and then sent into the ocean. And the fourth one was built on the port, and it was sent out into the ocean. And I'm sure you've already filled the gaps of what this means. But for us, if you think about our 3 words that go with Harbor International School is equip, achieve, influence, right? A lot of that and a lot of our values stem out of this right here, where we are here to equip people.
I've never seen that done before. Yeah.
And to pour into their lives and give value to them, add value to them, help them succeed and set them in a path of success.
Right.
Then we are here in bringing people who have value to pour out value into other people, right? Which is the shipping container, which was full and is pouring out. The third one, we see that we're also involved and called to be people who will help restore. Right. So there's brokenness in our lives. There's things missing. There's lack. There's lack of deeper things, and we are here to see that restoration, that reconciliation happen to be beautiful and new. And the fourth one is that we're here to build lives and to set them up for success in life. And each of these, the important part was that they were sent out into the ocean. So it was like a purpose being planted into each ship, and then it was being launched and catapulted into its own purpose for life, right? And which is where our fundamental philosophy also comes from, is that we're not necessarily here to just retain people all the time and just keep them selfishly for us. While our organization, the school, grows, the goal behind it is that do the people also grow with it and are able to find their specific purposes of their life and then kind of catapult it through Harbor in that direction so that they can thrive. So the key word here is thriving, right? Because all 4 ships thrived and they did what they were supposed to do. So that's what.
Talking of words, I'm never going to look at the word harbor the same way, because I always thought of harbor as where the ships come and ships go, but this entire story and this entire connection and the way you're seeing it and it connecting to this purpose is, it's awesome. It's wow. And I wonder, and so it's H.I.S. also. So
yes.
H.I.S. as in his.
Yes. So H.I.S. because when we hadn't yet come and started the groundwork for the school, we knew that we were gonna. When we knew that we were gonna do a school, we wanted to do an international school. Right. And so we didn't quite come up with that acronym intentionally and strategically. It just happened that in our first board meeting, we sat and then we realized that, wait, so the name that we received was Harbor, right? Through that vision of what we wanted to do. And then the international school was already kind of in our minds and set and ready. So we just integrated Harbor into those two other words, and it became H.I.S. And then it continually becomes a reminder for all of us who are here that really what we're up to, it would be sad if H.I.S. was only to exist for my lifetime. Right? Because then this is such a wonderful purpose. This is such a wonderful human flourishing that's happened that should never stop. And I think all humans would agree that human flourishing should not stop. It would be sad if this went down with my grave when I was gone, right? So we realized that this isn't mine. I don't own this thing. Like, even though I'm a co-founder and you know, I had this idea and I came with it and everything happened, I really actually submit this to God and say that this was a spiritual journey for me to be here. This is His. And so it doesn't stop because David goes, right? And neither does it go naturally to my son, because I feel like he needs to find his purpose. He doesn't get slapped onto what I'm doing. He doesn't get slapped onto what I've had in my life. You know, I know that there are specific things he's going to accomplish in his life that he's called to, right? And that'll give him the purpose of life rather than just doing what my dad does. Right. So often I say that Harbor is going to be a multi-generational vision. And that's the thing. So it's not me, it's not a person, it's not a figure. Yeah.
I'm going to go back to something that you said, and that seems to be like a recurrent theme. And one of the pieces that you said is, you know, you sat down with Donna, and it was a holiday, and that's you know, how you planned it, and this spawned from there. There is a saying, a family that prays together stays together. So I'm tweaking that saying a little bit, and this is something that has held true for me over time. And I'd say that a family that plans together stays together. And I see that also happening. There's a lot of energy release as you plan where you want to go and what's your purpose and co-create that. And I think there's a lot of energy there. I want to change gears a little bit. We're talking about the international piece. We're talking about developing students as a whole, looking at it differently. The word holistic comes up, and that word gets thrown around quite a bit, slapped onto almost every brochure going out there. How are you looking at holistic development?
I'm glad you bring that up. That's a very key component to what we do. And it's similar to our emotions and feelings of how we feel we're viewed as an international school because of that word international. There's a similar thing. We sometimes feel like we have so much to help everybody understand by what we mean international, and same way what we mean by holistic, and it's starkly different than what you see majorly around in the market. So when we, you know,
Can I sharpen that question a little bit? Something as you're speaking, something comes to my mind. If as you're in education, and all of us are in a lot of people looking at this would be in education, the teachers and stuff. And if you want, you know, if you're a parent, also you're obviously associated with that. So education, one of the big granddaddies of education, who contributed a lot of principles and stuff, was Benjamin Bloom. And Benjamin Bloom is this guy who came up with something called the Bloom's taxonomy, right, way back, I think in the 60s or the 70s, but I think it still holds true. And he looked at learning, at education, at cognitive development in three domains: the cognitive domain, the psychomotor domain, and the affective domain. So what that really means is the cognitive domain, for anybody not familiar with this, I'm sure you're pretty steeped into this. The cognitive domain is, you know, problem-solving skills, logic. How am I developing and building on those, right? So a lot of our academia is focused on that. Okay, so but that's one-dimensional. Then there's the other dimensional of psychomotor. So the whole sports and kicking and pushing and throwing a ball or a shuttlecock or a track event, that takes care of the psychomotor domain, which is a movement domain. But then there is a third domain, the affective domain, right, which is the emotional domain. And there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of requirement today, at least, with technology, with Gen Z, and, you know, post Gen Z and all of that. How am I kids and students more emotionally literate, more emotionally intelligent. And that's what Bloom was talking about way back then. I see a lot of schools focusing on the cognitive domain, studies and competitive exams and all that. I see them also focusing on the psychomotor domain. I haven't seen too much work happening on the affective domain. How do you deal with your emotions? Do I know what am I feeling right now, apart from good and nice, right? So emotional literacy. So how are you, could you speak to that a little bit as well? And connecting it to holistic. So very quickly, what I'm saying is, when I look at the word holistic, I'm looking at it in these three domains. So if I'm able to develop a kid in these three domains, and then that to me is holistic. What's your take on that?
All right. So the Bloom's model is very kind of pivotal to where we want our students to go. At H.I.S, we don't just see this as like it's not just a great model introduced to implement in classroom. We want to see an outcome through this in the kids' life. So almost a requirement for us is that we see some of the outcomes of this practice in our students when they graduate. We have what's called ESLERs, right? Expected School-Wide Learning Results, which are basically
so ESLERs, right?
ESLERs, ESLR.
Okay, expected
School-wide learning results.
Okay.
Right. Now, these are nothing to do with marks. Okay. These are all to do with markers and kind of outcomes that we see in a student. They are far more than just academia and subject to field-based excellence, right? So where Bloom taxonomy really shines for us and is it is a critical part of how we operate here, is that we want to see our kids carry these outcomes when they graduate out of school. Right. It is absolutely critical for us to witness that happen. And so when we take that goal and we put ourselves into our current moment, we have a lot of procedures and practices and systems in place that we're doing to have that. Well, before I go into addressing that third domain that you talked about, the affective one, I want to speak just a little bit about the other two. They're called the KSA, the knowledge, the skill, and the attitude. Right. And frankly speaking, I hate those words because they don't cover the full spectrum of what the domain talks about. So I'd rather say the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor, because it's a bit more holistic, and I think it explains the idea behind it better. Right. So going to the cognitive, knowledge, which is not a very fitting word to express the whole range. The acquisition of knowledge is a portion and a very small part of cognitive, excellence or cognitive thriving, right? So if we want high capacity cognitive beings, we don't just want to acquire knowledge, because when we're acquiring knowledge, all we're doing is we're filling our brains with information, and then we have to cast it out somewhere. And our brains often tends to forget things, and so we don't know how much we are actually retaining in that knowledge process. Now, that doesn't go to say that this is bad. It's wonderful. The acquisition of knowledge is critical to human development. We know that history shows us again and again, right? We are better off when we have knowledge. But there's a lot more that needs to be talked about when we talk about the cognitive space of that domain, right? And that is what makes a person interact skillfully, intellectually with the thing and the things around them and the world around them. Yeah. And these would be things like critical thinking, the skill of critical thinking, problem solving, being collaborators, being excellent communicators. And this is just a couple from the host of different things that we could look at in the spectrum. But when we educate our kids, when kids come into our classrooms and in our school, we're not just focused on how do we get them to retain a degree of knowledge and then just spill that out on a paper, go up to the next grade. What we're interested in is that are they becoming lifelong learners? Yeah. You'll hear that word being used a lot at H.I.S. because lifelong learning is actually what sets you up to growth, right? And growth mindset can only happen when you have that mindset to say, I want to always learn and I am always learning. And there is a passion behind that love. So when we think of that entire range and spectrum of things, students at H.I.S. will actually be students who will not just know things, but they will be able to critically evaluate things around them. They'll be able to look at the news and they'll be able to make inferences and connect dots and synthesize global affairs and make sense out of it. They'll be able to make some actual deeper sense out of some of these things that they experience in
And
life.
this at a very young age, right? So these are not grade 5 or 6 kids that we're talking about. We're even talking about grade 2 kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we try and focus all of this even as low as we can go. We're always in development and we're growing too. So we're always testing how that looks like. And it may not be the same, an appearance may not be the same in all levels, but we definitely implement them in different various ways. So that's the cognitive. I wanted to address.
And I think it's so much important because today, more than ever before, knowledge is king is a kind of I think it's losing its, that it's losing its throne, right? Because knowledge is a good thing, but knowledge is so easily accessible. What with artificial intelligence and what have you, ChatGPT, so on and so forth. So the knowledge is out there. You can go and get it. I think that what you're doing with that knowledge, how you're analyzing it, how you're making new stuff with that knowledge is. So how are you using, let's say, technology to come up with different permutation combinations is what the game is now about. And I also feel that as that happens, how are you dealing with your own emotional maturity? Are you looking at, let's say, something as simple as there is communication, there is collaboration, but let's just say the new influx of technology. There was internet, now then there was internet 2.0, now there's a whole AI-driven race, and it's ubiquitous. You can't get away from it. You have to get onto that bandwagon. So how are you looking at it? Are you going and embracing it, or are you saying, oh my God, my job just got lost because of that, and that stuff? So how are you dealing with these situations, which all the knowledge in the world may not equip you to deal with that, but when you start applying that knowledge and looking at it differently, I think that's what equips you to deal with the challenges of today, which is the future, and of course the challenges of tomorrow.
Remind me to come back to this at some point in our conversations. I know this will come up in a greater degree, but as far as we can go in technology, there is an undeniable piece and contribution that a human makes. In your entire journey, yes, of course, now we are looking at a flip and a change of how things have worked, how the world has been so far, right? But still, there is a value that humans add in orchestrating all of that technological change, right? And so our response cannot be like, I'm losing my job, right? Our response has to be, what is my place in this new order of things, right? What is my contribution and role? How do I play that part that I've done, but maybe it's augmented, maybe it's enhanced, maybe it's different. Maybe I need to pick up more skills to do that.
And it's also implying that their ability, there's a new ability here.
Absolutely.
Your ability to quickly reorient with what's thrown at you, find opportunity there and move. I think that's a huge new skill and requirement, or at least it's gaining more weightage.
Yeah, well, you just made a case in point of what I'm trying to say, is that knowledge acquisition, right, will make you think like, I've lost my job because my knowledge is irrelevant, now it's on Google, right? But the learner skills give you all the tools, it sets you up, your whole artillery is ready to be relevant to the time. Because you can critically think. Now you're not thinking, oh no, I've lost my job. You're thinking, what do I do now to create a better job?
Just keep you relevant.
Yeah, it keeps you on that edge. It does. So that's the spectrum of the cognitive space and domain that I feel when we look around us, a lot of education systems are missing out on that. And we need that. We need that now more than ever. But that kind of leads me into that psychomotor, and then I'll talk a little bit about affective. The psychomotor too, we're a country of billions. We should be producing some of the greatest, I should say, athletes and sportsmen. But if you look at statistics, our numbers are pretty low. And that's not because we don't have the potential, right? There's obviously a very high emphasis on one domain, right, that we just talked about, that actually takes away from the value of the other two domains. While we do encourage our kids to say, go and play, do a sport and things like that, an intentionality of developing purposeful psychomotor skills. That means skills that will not only just address certain lack or an inability in you so that you once got a skill and you're okay, but to take those lacks, to take those skills that will cover those gaps and say, what do I make of this? Right? So for example, there's many sports that have been now altered, and they're not your traditional sports, a field sport, right? Of course, football is still football. It was that way, decades ago. It still is that way, and it should be that way. But there are a lot of sports, like for example, the boundaries of climbing. Right, climbing is a sport. It there are major like events that happen, but that has evolved in so many ways. Right, what was a lack and a gap has now been filled with skill to overcome fear. Right, to overcome things that are deep rooted in us. So I don't think psychomotor domain was only meant to make us movable humans, if that makes sense. I think we were meant to do a lot more complex tasks with our physical being, and then bring out that same idea of creation, the highest degree in cognitive Bloom's pyramid, that same way to bring that out and create something new with what we can do physically. And that's why we see across the world there's people doing all kinds of things. Something like parkour has taken the world by storm. People are just like, that's it. In fact, it's become a great fan following more than a lot of traditional sports, because that's encouraging and enabling certain things. Now, of course, it comes with a risk, so I won't say go out and do that. That would not be great unless you have your parents' consent or you're a parent and you can make your own decisions. But the thing is, there is a lot more than just the ability to move and to say I can do the basic, right? I can do the necessary. And I found this hilarious when I heard it. Our brains are, our body is not the locomotive for our brains.
Our body is not the locomotive for our brains. Okay.
Our body was meant to be an independent identity, right? Our brains are meant to be an independent identity too, right? A lot of people are just inflating and their mental capacity while they're not equipping themselves with their physical capacity, and they get to a certain point in their life and there's issues. Most of the time they're spending in a hospital rather than doing something they could with all of that information, knowledge, and wealth of cognitive capacity. So that plays into it in that holistic, journey. And the last one. And
before you go into the last one, so what I'm hearing you say in the psychomotor domain, what I'm hearing you say is that psychomotor, the boundaries are shifting, and the boundaries are shifting. Let's say climbing is not only being used to build muscle, to build skill, to build fitness, but it's also being used as a kind of maybe a therapy, maybe healing, a form of healing. So we see the boundaries of sport and the psychomotor boundary also blending with a few other pieces, and then like parkour you mentioned, I see a lot of people picking up parkour or calisthenics, not just at an age of 15 or 13 or 12 or whatever, but also at an age of 40 or beyond, 50 and so on and so forth, because the capacity has grown. It is out there, it is more accessible, the subject matter expertise is more accessible, and then people have disposable income, are making that time to go and pick up this new skill, and it's feeding. Let's say a CEO is now doing parkour. It's doing something for his brand or her brand. A CEO or a top leader is doing calisthenics and can do the human flag, which is really the body, perpendicular to a pole. It's doing so much for that person's brand and the way you look. So, wow, this guy is, he's coming or she's coming out of a place of values. This person is, trying to look at the world holistically. So, yeah, I see what you're saying. So, it's not only physical, but the psychomotor is also going to the spaces of healing, as well as people are doing it to change how they look at themselves and how other people, that whole brand aspect comes into this.
And I think that just kind of leads me into that affective domain, right? Each of these domains, I believe, are not meant to exist independently. They're meant to mishmash with each other, intertwine and weave through, and that's what you're saying too, and that's what we at H.I.S do. We are very intentional in the design of our physical education program to help kids meet some of their social emotional needs, which is the affective domain, right? And it is more than just attitude. That's why I don't like that word, because it's a lot more than just a person's attitude. There's a lot goes into it. There's the way you think, the perspectives that you have, right? The way you are able to identify emotional needs, the way you're able to respond to them, but also the way you're able to manage yourself and your emotional needs and feelings and things like that. Right? Empathy is a big word we talk about. And empathy, I feel, is like you're on the top of the hill when you can empathize, right? And socially and emotionally. Because as humans, that's what we need. Now, there's sufficient data for us out there that social emotional well-being directly influences cognitive and physical health. Right? There's enough. Like, we don't need to talk about it. There's so much research on it. There's enough papers and reports on it, and there's evidence on it that if you are if someone's in depression, right, and is not emotionally healthy, right, they are going to mentally suffer. Right, they are going to physically suffer.
Absolutely.
So we're one being with all these different parts that happen, and so the thriving has to happen in all of those. And so for HIS to throw and say we're a school that pursues holistic growth and leave out one domain, that would be silly. That would just be like, wait, why would you even use that word? Because that's what holistic means, is that it covers everything. So when we talk about social and emotional, there are simple values that turn into practice for us at school, right? We were talking about circle time. Why do we start the day with a circle time?
What's circle time?
Okay, that's good. Circle time it can be called carpet time, morning time. People can use different terms for it. But it is a moment where you come together as a learning community in a classroom. And instead of getting into your, so to speak, cognitive growth, you first sit down and recognize that, hey, we are a community first. We have other needs first, social, emotional, right? And we spend time doing things that we typically won't in our academic engagement. So circle time would look like sharing about how you're feeling, articulating deeper feelings.
And is this just for the teachers?
This is for the students. This happens in each classroom every morning. A teacher is doing it.
So what, like grade 1, grade 2 as
all
well?
the grades. All the grades. It starts from preschool. So 3-year-olds are sitting and articulating feelings. We have what's called a feelings chart, right? And we help them by not just giving them words, because they can't yet read at that age when they're 3, but we give them emojis of faces and expressions. And we were like, what you felt, can you put your finger at what emoji or a face is showing what you feel? And they're right from that age being able to articulate what I felt last night when my mom and dad revealed this news to me, right? It has affected me deeply that I can't now go into my academics until I've dealt with it and I've had an empathetic learning community support me and scaffold my day for me. And so what happens in a circle time is focused on those inner things, right? The deeper things that often get overlooked. And that's why you'd have a kid suddenly who would be great at academics, terrible because they are suffering and struggling emotionally.
And this happens every morning?
Every morning in every classroom. In fact, we even do circle time with our teachers. We do it in our staff meeting. We'll go around and focus on how is your health. And when we say health, we don't mean physical health only, though that's part of it. We champion each other to be physically healthy, but we're also challenged, like, how are you emotionally? How are you doing socially? How are you doing physically? How are you doing mentally in your profession, in everything? How are you doing? You need to thrive. You got to be each of those ships thrived, and that's our pursuit. So really, that social emotional. I think I'll give one more example. Discipline. Right?
Examples are good.
Discipline. That's one of the things that schools have policies around. Our policy is quite rigorous, but there is a very small philosophy behind it that kind of overarches the whole thing. And that is reconciliation and restoration. Kind of goes with that third boat.
Reconciliation and restoration.
Yes.
Okay.
The goal behind discipline, which often schools you'll notice tend to do, is manage, control.
Right.
Behavior is for control. Classroom management. You manage things. That isn't focused on the person. That is focused on the environment.
Right.
How do I get a good environment so I can do my job and leave? Right? But when we talk about reconciliation and restoration, we're saying we are deeply invested in not just the successes of a child, but places and areas where they fail and they don't, make good choices. And we want to step into that time with them to help restore them through a process of understanding that it's not just about a sorry. It's not just about how do I get away with consequences. It's about, hey, what I did caused these ripple effects. What I did offended so many people. What I'm saying is actually harming these many people. So there's a lot that's going on in that discipline process. The whole idea is that a child ends up feeling like, I have found a point of restoration for myself and for those involved, and I've reconciled with those that I might have affected. Right? So the discipline is not so much just to control. It is really to see change, which goes back to that initial dream, right? Right? Change lives and transformation. Right. That's what it is. This is an action. And we do that every day. So there's classroom management. Yes, there's skills and strategies. Yes, there's discipline. All of it is done with the heart of love. All of it is done for you to thrive. And all of it is done with the whole person in mind. So that kind of speaks into the Bloom's model and holistic key.
I want to wear the devil's hat a little bit, all right? And I want to do it saying that you have just that much time, X number of hours for which the kids are here and stuff. As you focus holistically on the different aspects of developing the child, if I look at the way legacy schools, traditional schools are run, they have a unidimensional focus, or let's say a large part of their focus is unidimensional and is not equally distributed or distributed amongst the other three domains. But what that is doing is, it's the upside of that. There are lots and lots of downsides of that, but the upside of that is it's preparing the kids for these cutthroat competitive exams. You would know better, but a lot of colleges have a cutoff in India at a 99%, right? So for that kind of cutthroat competition, whether it's an I.S. exam, a medical MBBS, what do you call it, a PMT, right? Those, or banks, IITs of the different places. How do you think this kind of approach would be preparing a kid, a student, for those kind of exams, for those kind of, I wouldn't say jobs, but for those kind of exams?
Well, allow me a chance to introduce you to a model that I use when it comes to understanding, let's jump into personal brand a little bit here. Okay, so when we're talking about personal branding, which is what you've touched upon a little bit, right? The core understanding is this: that we've got products and services. The moment they're launched, they cause a shift. They cause a change. Right. It might be for one person, it might be for a billion people, right? But it does shift something. Every service and every product is causing a change, a shift, and there is implications, right? It's the same with a child, right? The moment a child is born, the child changes the life of the parents, changes the life of those around, and as the kid continues to grow, you're going to see that effect, right? The shift spill out to many other spaces and many other people. So their growth continues to grow their personal brand's effect, right? They continue to have an effect on others too. So when that happens, the child is able to, a child is at a very developmental stage where they don't quite understand the implications part of it, or what contribution they're making into the social environment, the society, or the human life, or what their role on the earth is. They're not thinking those things, right? But they are making a change, right? Suddenly a family is affected at the birth of a child, and that family responds, behaves, chooses very different things before the child was born. Right. So automatically a child brings in a personal brand, right? There's a product or a service that launches that shifts the nature of life of those around, right? So when you think of that personal brand being honed into a direction, which is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about kids. How do they get ready for certain competitive exams, for certain benchmarks, or certain colleges, or even kind of global standards. We're talking about who they're becoming. Right, who they're becoming, and so that personal brand element is a critical piece to who they become. In that growth, there is the role of the parents, and then there's the role of those who influence and impart on a more repetitive, structural, progressive way. School becomes that obvious next place outside of home that becomes the place of impartation, so to speak. When we're talking about a child moving in a certain direction, I always talk about this model that I came up with, and it's like a vector, right? A vector has two properties. It has magnitude and it has direction, right? So when we look at a person, when we look at a child, right, we don't just look at them as a 3-year-old. Okay. They're one day going to be 30. Right. So their effect on their family is going to evolve. Right. And it's going to be in their classroom, it's going to be in their school, it's going to be someday in their company, in their leadership, in their position, in their society. Right. When that grows, we're talking about what we at H.I.S call potential. It's there in our vision statement. We want kids to attain their potential.
And that's one part of the vector.
Yes. Okay. Right, and that's the magnitude. So if you think in the if you think in the vertical axis. Right, you think magnitude, and you think in the lateral axis, right, you think of direction. Now, if we invest in the potential of the child and not just our agenda, right? Now, we can prepare the child just for one specific thing. We want the goal to be this, and we're only preparing them. We're not fully utilizing the magnitude of potential they have. Right. We might be doing some, but then we'll leave the rest to themselves, or hopefully they'll be lucky in life and they'll be able to reach that potential. So our role at H.I.S becomes this identification that no child is unworthy of that magnitude, right? There is no genius, because everyone is. Right? And that's the design of the creator, right? I believe in a creator. I believe in God, our creator, who's created things so beautifully. Right. That means that every child, every human that's here is being created beautifully, wonderfully, and very, very, there's a complex design to each of us. That means if a creator is so competent, who can create the universe, will he create creation like us with little potential and magnitude? No, huge. That's huge. The problem that happens is we start at the top and we try and force the agenda down on kids, right? So we're saying, this is what I want for you. This is where you should go. And therefore, this is my agenda for your life. Now I got to raise your magnitude of potential in that. But then you realize that kid is not gifted in that area. And then that kid becomes a fool. Yeah. Right? They're scoffed at, they're mocked in the classrooms, and they become the backseat kids, back row kids, right? And then there's the smarter kids, the good kids, the bad kids. We don't use those terms here. Every kid has a genius.
Or if I may interrupt here, what's also happening is, even if the kid is able to cope up, even if that kid is able to come up to your agenda and clears whatever your agenda demands that person to clear, we look around us and we see a lot of successful people, in air quotes, in terms of making the money, getting the position and role, completely unsatisfied, very unfulfilled. And I think one of the places is because not too much time has been spent on going back to a word, one of your words, purpose. Figuring out what's your purpose, where the hell are you coming from, what's your potential, what's that saying to the direction that you have to go to. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So in that range of potential and magnitude, our job is to discover the design of a child. Right? Wow. We're not here to say that clearly all size, one size doesn't fit all. Right? Everyone's made differently. So what is the design of this particular child, and who are they going to be when they're 30? Right? Let's talk about that. And are we in that journey of helping them gain that magnitude? So if we look at this y-axis that's going up in magnitude, there's another axis that comes that I call direction. Right? Now you see products and services. Right? You launch a product and it has an impact. It shifts things. There's that magnitude. Right? It goes up. But then the product or service could change human life for the good or for the bad. We clearly know there are products that make our life very, very good.
Yeah.
And I clearly believe there are products that make our life terrible.
Terrible.
Right? They take us down the spiral.
Yeah.
That's where so many of our addiction problems are there, because there are products that are there that drive us down this not so healthy path, right?
Yeah.
And so this the y-axis then becomes our directionality, right? So what we're looking at as we grow in the magnitude of that potential of these of our students, we've got to use, just like any product and services, the direction part is critical.
Okay, so what I hear you say, in another way, even if a child, so what you're saying is if the child does not live up to your direction or your agenda, but sometimes a child does and struggles and somehow or the other lives up to your agenda, and then goes on to get a very high post, get lots of money, success in air quotes, as in the monetary terms, in the terms of fame and stuff like that. But we also see a lot of CXOs, CEOs, leaders, government officials at very high posts, earning lots of money, very unfulfilled lives, very dissatisfied lives. And I think that's also coming from here, of this whole, I would like to, this whole tightrope walk between potential and direction, and bringing balance to both these aspects. Yeah.
So just going back to the quadrant, right? We've got magnitude, we've got direction. So when we're I'll go back, reiterate a little bit. Any product or service is going to lead into a great direction of human flourishing or human degradation.
Human flourishing or degradation.
Right.
Okay.
And then the magnitude of it continues to remain as an independent piece.
Yeah.
Right. The magnitude of degradation we've seen in the history of mankind can go so far, where when we read our history, it's scary. How did we ever arrive there as humans, right? But then there's this directionality of human flourishing, and we see so many examples, right? The most classic, let's just talk Mother Teresa, right? She used her potential and the magnitude to the fullest in such a wonderful direction, and she was able to accomplish a beautiful human flourishing, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking. Now, often, yes, a child may be able to make that climb up that ladder in the magnitude, and then find themselves like, wait, on that spectrum of direction, I'm lost here. Right. Even if you're doing good stuff, if you haven't figured out your purpose and your magnitude, that means, what is David meant to be and doing on this earth all his life? That purpose piece. It's almost impossible to find consistent, deep-rooted joy in life. Because you'll always be wondering, did I make a mistake? Right. Does this have any meaning? Right. Where am I going in life? So for us to bring a child into our school and say, the magnitude is not decided by us, right? That genius is decided by the creator.
The potential.
The potential in a child. Right.
Yeah.
The potential is decided by the designer,
That's
the creator.
That's such a powerful statement. I just want to say it again. The potential is not decided by us.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so our job is discover that potential and continue to now work the child up that ladder in their potential. The moment they do that, they're going to find a purpose, they're going to thrive. Yeah. Now, the other part comes in the direction, right? If we give them a wrong direction, if all the other things like the morality, the values, and all the stuff that makes who we are, our choices, our decisions, if we put them in a wrong direction, right, lower in that quadrant on the left side, then they can be high magnitude of destruction.
Whoa.
Right? That's dangerous.
Of destruction.
That's a very dangerous place to be.
Very powerful, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the opposite of that is high magnitude of influence.
Wow.
Right? Or impact. So what we're trying to do is, if you look at the quadrant, we're trying to be in that top right? In the business world, we all love to be in that top right. So that's great. That's where all the good stuff is happening, right? And when we have high magnitude and high direction, right direction, good direction, we're the place which I call it thriving, right? That's where humans thrive. Right. Their potential is achieved. The child knows this is what I'm good at and I can do it. And the other things too in his life is growing. We're just not after a rat race and a hamster wheel, like do it quick, get that much marks. Why is it 99? Why is it not 100? We're trying to say, look at the things that he's designed to do and let us hone that. Let's build on top of that. Let's continue to grow in that magnitude. So that thriving is that top right. We go into the left, we've got magnitude, but the wrong direction, and I call that disaster. right? Like you are setting up somebody with a lot of power in the wrong direction to cause disaster, right? That's a dangerous place to be, because now your personal brand, so to speak, you are going to impact people, but not for their flourishing, for their degradation, with a lot of power, right? And you have a lot of influence to cause the degradation in their lives. Now, if you go down in the bottom left, right, we're seeing no magnitude, right? So no potential has been gained, and we're in the wrong direction,
Low,
right?
yeah.
That is a low point of life. Yeah. That is like you not doing anything that gives you value, and you are in the wrong direction, right? You're just lost. I'll call it lost. That's right. You just don't know why
that's where all the downward spirals are happening. Absolutely. Depression and God knows what all.
Yeah. So you're lost. You don't know the purpose of your life. You don't know what your potential is, and you're not in the right.
It's not to say that you don't have the potential. You've not spent time unearthing it, that's just not been excavated till now. Absolutely. You don't spend time digging for that gold.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I see is this. I'd like to add another axis to this. Talking to you, there's Z-axis. Yes. So what I hear you say is that there's an X-axis and a Y-axis. There's potential and there's magnitude, right? Am I getting that right? Yeah.
Potential, magnitude. Yes.
Yeah. And it's about digging for gold. It's about unearthing their potential, reflecting, allowing them to see their potential. Showing them and giving them exposure to the various directional arrows out there, the different options, observing to see where is their tendency toward, and then that's an amazing journey that's being crafted. So to me, it's like a journey. Absolutely. You're doing stuff, you're exploring stuff, you're reflecting, you're showing them the mirror. Okay, I don't know if this is working. Maybe let's try something else. So that's the journey. The Z-axis that I'm introducing is going back to where you started from, is faith. Like you said, somebody put that potential there, right? So having faith in the potential that's being put there, in the someone that put the potential there, and in the person that has that potential, having that faith, and saying, hey, you know what? Just because I'm going to beat you blue and black, figuratively, saying study like an ungodly number of hours a day from an inhuman age, let's say 8 years, 9 years, 10 years old, they're studying like 3 hours a day after school. So that's one way of doing it, but there are other ways of doing it. Looking at the potential, giving them the direction, trusting and having faith that they're going to do something meaningful and worthwhile of their lives. I'm also going to go back to, you're talking about their personal brand. The phrase that comes to mind is, "Wo to bachcha hai." Right. In Hindi, say, that's a little kid over there. Yeah. Does the phrase personal brand also apply for a kid? And I think there's a bundle of questions in here, so choose however you want to go at it. So does that apply to a kid? At what age? Is it important for a young child to start looking at his or her personal brand? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I may have just introduced it a little bit, where the whole idea of any product and service, the moment it's launched, it's causing a change and effect, right? The world is never the same by the launch of this service or product. Now, it may change only one person's life, but it does, right? The same thing is happening with children. So what's going on is that with kids, when they come, their impact and influence, right, in that personal brand, so to speak, to the society at large, is very little. It is mostly governed by the parents. So the parents decide, where the child goes. Yeah. They don't put the child on a pedestal and say, okay, now give a great talk, even when they're 5 years old, right? They choose and they decide where is it that my child will actually stand, the environments they'll be in, the circumstances they'll be putting. It's a very low impact, low influence environment, right? The parents do that. But here's the challenge. Parents are now being charged, right, with something very important. They have been put in charge of a child who's in a growth pattern, whose influence and impact is only going to grow. right? So when I was born, it changed my mom and my dad and my brother's life, right? Very significantly. Then it changed my grandparents' life. Then it changed my uncle and aunt's lives, right? And fast forward all these years, now I am at a place where I can impact and influence the lives of everyone that works around me, that lives around me. So there's an exponential growth in that part, which means we can backtrack from there and say that your personal brand starts the moment you are there. It's kind of like the launch. You launch a product and a service, it changes. It might change for one, but what we're saying is this one is only going to grow.
Oh, I love that, yeah.
Right? It's never going to stay one.
Yeah.
It's going to only grow. And it's like the, like the investment curve, right?
Yeah.
The compounding, the hockey stick, they call it.
Right.
Right? So it's going to look very shallow, and then suddenly it's going to take off. And then like, wait a minute, this was my son who was just basically doing a job, but now he's a CEO of a firm, and he has an influence over so many people.
Right.
Then you ask this question: what personal brand have I shaped in my child?
Right.
All of these years when the hockey stick looked very shallow, that has now impacted what he is and offers to the world today. Right? And so that's the same thing. It goes back to the same quadrant. Have I set him in the top right where he's thriving?
Right.
Or is he in the disaster side?
Right.
Or is he on the loss side? Right? Or is he ineffective? Right? He has all the great magnitude, right? Sorry, he has all the great direction but no magnitude. You're ineffective. Right? You can't do anything. So the personal brand automatically begins to influence and impact the moment you're there. You see, human presence is powerful. Right? The human presence, the way our Creator made us, we either bring something, we add something, or we subtract something.
Right.
So somebody could walk into this room and clearly add a lot of joy into it, or steal joy.
Right.
The human presence is very powerful, and so that's where the flourishing and the destruction idea comes from. Right? Are we after human flourishing, or are we after human degradation? Right. So when we're going back to your original question of personal branding, I would say this would be my suggestion to parents. And I have a 3-year-old, so I know what this is like in a more recent experience. I would say when you're thinking to have a kid, start thinking about their personal brand.
Wow.
Not when they're born.
Right.
When you're thinking to have a kid, start thinking about their personal brand. Who they're going to be, what magnitude, potential, what are you going to set them up to, their circumstances, the environment you're going to put them in, the direction you're going to give them.
Right.
It's there. Because even in the womb, a baby is already causing an impact. What is that impact? The life of the mother is changed. It starts with one, and it gets to 1 million and billions some days.
And there's so much research out there that's saying that in the womb, the baby's picking up so many thoughts, the impressions and stuff like that. And I think that, it's also it predates birth, is what you're saying. So that's amazing. And because you're creating the soil. You're not fixing it in a very hard line kind of way. This is what my child is going to be, but you're saying I'm going to create the soil. Part of the soil is how am I going to, as parents, how am I going to be compassionate? Something is how am I going to treat failure in my own life, and therefore in my child's life, am I going to always rap on the knuckles every time something bad happens? So that's one of the pieces. And then as a child is born, allowing experiences and putting the child in different kinds of experiences in a very nurturing kind of a way, and then really watching how the child grows, where the child is tending towards. So that's what I'm taking away from that.
And I think I may haven't answered the question. I was trying to draw context to answer that question about what about competitive exams? How does this school get kids ready for it? Now, here's the thing: if all we're chasing is that a magnitude that is our agenda, well, now that's a choice. As a parent, do you want to impose your decisions on your child, or do you want them to take autonomy of who they become? Because one day you'll be gone as a parent; they'll still be living, And so, will they love what they're doing that you've imposed on them, or are they going to take that responsibility and say, this is what I chose? What that means is, now if a kid feels like, no, I need to do MBBS and I got to become a doctor and do pre-med and medical school and then become this neurosurgeon, if that's the goal, the magnitude element, it just affirms the fact that we are investing in our kids not only to acquire knowledge and to be skilled information retainers, but also the whole spectrum of that cognitive domain, right? Critical thinking. Now, think about this. You can do MBBS, right? It is a hard course. I mean, a lot of people do it. You can become a doctor, right? But to be a doctor that can change the course of the medical field, and you don't have critical thinking skills, and you can't solve problems, but all you know is information that the heart lies here, and I cut this much, and the incision is this deep, and I can do that, and stitch it back, and all of this goes on. I'm very illiterate in that, but just that, you'll be a doctor.
You'll be a doctor.
Right? But more than that, everything else, you'll be a doctor that will probably be leading a research and some discovery in the future for mankind.
Correct.
Right?
So I think this is classical, because if you go to a pulmonologist and you have some problem with breathing, and he takes a look at your lungs, or she takes a look at your lungs and says, okay, so there's a problem. But if the problem is like an inch above the lungs, he says, you know what, you got to go to an ENT. Right? So an inch here, an inch there, you don't know nothing about the world. And the world in itself, even to like milk that analogy, the world itself is so interconnected. But when we're specializing in a razor sharp way, that has its ups, but how can we also, going back to that word, how can we also look at the world from a holistic perspective, from a systemic perspective? How are things interacting with each other? We talked about that in Bloom's, you know. And I see about your approach, one of the things that bubbles to the surface for me is that you're also equipping them with tools. What do I mean? You're equipping them with discipline. How do you form habit long term? I've just written this down. How do you build the fuel of purpose? So that why the hell do I want to become a doctor? If that answer is clear, then when you go to become a doctor, it's fulfilling. I'm not just taking away a fat paycheck, which is fulfilling as well. I'm not taking anything away from that. But I'm also healing people's lives, and then, getting more of a visionary kind of outlook. And we need more of that. Not just more of people just looking at these boxes and that's only where I can help you, and I pull back and I'm gone away. So I see that. I totally resonate with that. I want to change gears a little bit. We've been talking about the kids, the parents. We've been talking about your outlook on this entire piece. I think one of the components is the teachers, right? And I'm going to come at this slightly obliquely. I'm going to come at this saying, if you want to know the culture of a place, like I've tried this in a couple of corporate establishments, you walk into an organization, walk into the reception, and pretend like you're lost, and see what happens. See how people react to you. And that's going to tell you so much about the culture of the place. When I walked into H.I.S. some time back, a couple of months back, I felt something. Didn't really know what it was. It intuitively felt something nice. And then time passed. Now, as I was preparing for this interview, and I was talking to some of the staff, some of the teachers, and so on and so forth, what came out was that's something that I was talking about, was that everyone said, it came up in a very strange word. Strange because I didn't expect it. The teachers, almost all of them said, we feel safe. And at first I dismissed it. And then that word came up again. We feel very safe. And I said, I wanted to ask, I didn't know if it was appropriate or not appropriate. What do you mean, physical safety and stuff? And they themselves said, it's not safety at a physical level, but we feel very emotionally safe, right? To me, that's a biggie, right? Because Google, we all know Google, spent millions of dollars trying to crack what makes high-performing teams. And they did lots of research on different types of teams and permutation combinations and all of that. And many factors emerged. One factor stood head and shoulders above the rest, and that was psychological safety, right? I think it's a big deal because a lot of organizations are chasing this, find it hard to, and I find that happening over here. And I think why it's important is because if the teachers are feeling this way, then that translates to the kids. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you experienced that. That's actually a marker for me to say that what we've been practicing as a result of our values, it shows, right? There's a
And sorry if I'm just interrupt there. And also, it's that every teacher is saying that. You know, or quite a few of them that I met, they all have that common language. Right. And I just, you know, with my experience in the corporate sector, they're paying big bucks to stay on the same page, everybody on the same values. They're taking them to workshops. They're putting up all these schmaltzy platitudes in forms of posters all over the boardrooms and stuff like that. Over here, it's just happening. So yeah, that's why it's amazing, surprising to me.
Yeah. Well, safety is definitely a big part of what we pursue, but there is a very fundamental root that I want to talk about, because safety is, you know, for mankind, for humans, for us people, safety first comes for ourselves, right? And we are in some ways, we respond out of that instinct that we have to keep ourselves safe, and then we think about others' safety, right? I want to you know, share with you kind of the philosophy behind it, and what you're experiencing is actually a progression of from the root a lot of things, and here's the fruit of it, right? What you are seeing. You see, when the way I view any person, right, it dramatically shifts when I understand the story behind the creation of that person. The value, the design.
So let me just pull back on that. When I view a particular person, it dramatically shifts when I understand the creation of that person.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So let me talk about that.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I talked earlier, I mentioned about the complexity with which human life is made, right? The beauty with which humans are designed with, right? The capacities that we humans are designed with. I mean, there's so many movies that just kind of highlight this. Like, humans have so much more we realize we can do, right? That's there not because we made ourselves, not because we have systems to prove that. That's in our design. The design has been put by a designer, right? Any brand, the design of certain thing has been put by a design. There's got to be a story beyond the creation that has to lead to the creator.
That's right.
Right? No one, like, often Tim Cook gets talked about a lot because of Apple, right? And not just the iPhone. Because obviously he's the face, the name behind it, and so he gets a lot of credit. In the same way, if I'm interacting with you, you know, I am looking at you with a fundamental understanding, and that is that you are wonderfully, perfectly designed, right? The moment that I understand that, it completely shifts my understanding of how I interact with you, right? You have been made like me, right? In a beautiful way, with capacity, with design, with goals and purposes for this life, right? And with great potential in you. I began to treat you differently. What I do then is I don't see a person who I'm competing with. I don't necessarily see a person who's better or worse than me. I just see us as like outcomes of the designer, right? And that significantly shifts how I treat people, because that image is something I revere and I respect, right? Because I deeply revere and respect the creator. Everything he's made, I'm going to treat it with respect. I'm going to treat it with safety. I'm going to treat it with value, honor, dignity, all of that, right? It doesn't matter to me if a homeless person walks here, right? And they look a certain way because they were designed by that same creator, right? Just the outcomes of their life turned out to be this way, that they're there, but they're as important with us.
We have the perfect design, right? That's what I hear you say, and I think that's also informing many things, like how you look at safety, how you look at how people are dealt with when there is conflict or when things aren't going as you would like them to go. I think that's how it is. Also, that's where it's also rippling into, right?
Yeah, it definitely ties in to a fundamental value we place in people because of their design. You know, so the creation it deserves a degree of respect, honor, and affirmation because of the creator. To give you an example, would be kind of your usual art gallery analogy. When you walk in there, you're very respectfully engaging with the art, because you know that this is the artist behind it, and there's been time, energy, beauty, and a lot that has gone into that creation. So you don't go touch the art.
Right.
You don't start fiddling with it. You look back, you take time, you treat it with dignity.
Right.
You give it time and honor by trying to explore what was the artist trying to say.
Right.
You try and see what is the potential and the purpose of this art that's made, right? In the same way, we humans are the most complex design that exists on this earth. Science is not even halfway there to understanding all about about the body itself, let alone the soul and the spirit and all those things. It's such a complex design. The moment we start to see things that way, we're able to bring in a value to every single person because of that. So what that means is, if I've got a homeless man walk through the door, just because they look a certain way doesn't mean that they deserve a certain treatment. They will still be deserving of that fundamental, value that we are placing in people, not because of what they've done, but because of their design, because of the creator involved in that creation, right? And so that's a big part of why safety is practiced at H.I.S. because now we're not operating out of a rule, right? It isn't a code. It isn't something that's been imposed on people that create a safe environment. Nobody was told here, create a safe environment.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? We have not talked about that very much, but the reason why it's so evident to you and to others is because there is that fundamental value that they place in every person, right? And that comes to aligned values, right? So what you see as a practice, usually behind that there's a lot of things. So to kind of show you the trail of how that happens is, I'm going to treat a person with value and think of their emotional, physical, mental, cognitive, every kind of safety, all kinds of safety, because of my faith. Right? My faith leads me to understand the creator and his design. That leads me to believe that you and I and everybody has a certain degree of value.
Right.
Because of that faith and because of my belief in it, now I can come up with values, right? That drive, that have been poured out because of my faith into my life and into what I do, right? So those values are not created because this was a good idea, because this would be important, because this would help accomplish the mission. Right. No, those values have stemmed out of a very deeper walk that you have, and that faith leads to believing, that leads to values. Now, values lead to practices, right? Now, these practices are not, like I said, they're not imposed. They're an outcome of the values and an outcome of the belief and the outcome of our faith.
It's like the tip of the iceberg.
It is.
Practice is what you see.
Exactly.
The values happening below the waterline,
Right.
but it's actually giving rise to what you see. And I also, going back to a word that you use, design, the belief and the faith and the value needs to have some kind of a vehicle that gets you from below the waterline to above the waterline. What I mean by that is, what are the practices? This word has emerged. What are the practices, or how have you made this a process? How have you systematized it? This value of safety. How has this happened? As you think of it, let me just give you an example. Like we were talking about a little while earlier about Bloom and the affective domain. That's what we were talking about. Now, in that domain, we went into the affective domain, and I said, so we're also looking at the emotional literacy. And one very simple but I think very powerful practice was a circle time.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, an example of how you're putting it into a system. Right. It's in a timetable. That's a system. It's a process. Right. Every time you come in, the first thing that's going to happen, this is what's going to happen. The second thing that's going to happen, this is what's going to happen. So it's part of a system, right? To give you another example, the admission form. When it comes to the values, I'm telling you about your own admission form, haha. But the admission form, the first value is we put God first. That's in a way, systematizing the spiritual.
Right.
Right? How are you systematizing safety?
So it does stem out of that same first value, right? Like all of it ties into that first value in a big way, because I referred to this earlier, and I talked a little bit about it. But we humans, because of this fallen world, I think we don't have to argue about that. That this world is broken, right? There's enough evil and wickedness out there that we could do without, for sure, right? Which means that whenever any kid is born to this world, they are born into all the muck and the chaos of this world. They're not born into a beautiful garden with all the privileges that every kid gets. Certainly not many, in our nation. So when we have people, who are coming into our school, into our lives, right? We're talking about safety, which is not necessarily stemming out of a practice. It is stemming out of values, right? And the values stemming out of, like I said, belief and faith. When we put God first, I am taking away the variable of human reaction, right? Because humans, we will naturally incline towards what's not good, and I think there's enough proof for that, right? If I were to make a guarantee about something, there's always room where I cannot be trusted. There's always room, because I myself cannot trust often myself. And nobody who says I am 100%, dependable and I will, 100% be trustworthy. What we realize is that we live in a flawed world where we are flawed too, right? If I don't have something that lives above me that creates this overarching objective truth and objective standard, right? Then I have then I cannot impose any certain practices around the people and the organization I'm in. I need to have even more higher standards that will not fail, falter, or change, right? And so when we say God comes first, right, it holds me every day accountable to treat everyone with safety, respect, dignity, and honor, not because I came up with this idea and one day I might not feel like it and I might compromise on safety, but rather I'm held to the standard that there is a higher authority over me and I'm responding to that authority in my practices of creating safety.
If I may take that a step further.
Yes.
And say, therefore, when a teacher, and I'm looking at the teachers right now, because that's where it starts from. Starts from you, of course, but the teachers interacting with the students. So the teachers are happy, feel safe, then that's certainly transferring to the students. When a teacher makes a mistake, goofs up, falls back on a commitment, we're human, we all do that, or there is conflict between the teachers or between methodologies, how to deal with that?
Yeah, so I'm a firm believer of proactive rather than reactive, right? Proactive is always going to create a great culture. Reactive will always set out fires, right? So when we bring in people and staff and teachers into our school, right, we have a very rigorous onboarding process, and it goes into depths not just so that we can filter out people, but with the intention that we can find the right people. When we do find the right people, we know there's always refining that needs to happen in the lives of people, and as that refining moves forward, we have created systems to create that degree of safety to go back to it, right? So the stemming of it comes from this higher authority, my faith and belief and values and practices. But when I put systems into place, I want to tie it all the way. This thread has to go all the way back to say, if I want to implement something, and I'm going to give you an example, we call it the 6 trust commitments, right? When a new teacher comes into us, or any staff, even in the office, they have to go through an orientation and onboarding process. In that process, they go through very rigorous engagement with content that we believe in that stems out of this entire progression, right? And so the 6 trust commitments, what it does is it says we operate out of trust. We don't operate out of suspicion. We will choose to fill the gaps with trust rather than suspicion, because suspicion is poison. That kills you. That kills a team. That kills the culture. But trust, it builds the team, right?
So if I may pause there, there's an interesting saying that comes to our mind. In a relationship, you can operate with a little less love.
Yes.
You can't operate with less trust. So completely got you there. Yeah.
So something like the systems of having the 6 trust commitments, and if you walk around our school, you'll actually see a poster of it. Yeah. It's upstairs. We hold each of us accountable. And what that 6 trust commitment says, it's not that the founder or the leader is responsible for the 6 trust commitments. It says everyone is a player in that game. So everyone practices the 6 trust commitments to everybody. So they're not just trustworthy to their boss, they're trustworthy to everybody in the team.
What happens when it breaks?
When it breaks, that's what one of the 6 trust commitments says, is that when I fall short of a commitment I made, right, and I break your trust, I will run to you first and reconcile rather than deal with it badly by bringing in different people in, right? So give you the benefit of the doubt. So if there's
I'll reach out, and this talks to your proactive bit.
Exactly. There's a proactiveness here. It's not wait for the damage to happen and then do something. Because what happens is often when there's conflict in work environments, right? It's not so much the problem or the conflict, but it's the reaction of the conflict that causes so much damage, where you go and talk to 10 other people and now you've created sides and teams and now you've got discord happening, right? But what our trust commitment says, that if I have created a gap in my relationship with you, I maybe said something that offended you publicly, right, I will come to you first and I will fill the gap with trust, right? And I will say, hey, maybe there's a backstory I don't know, and therefore I'll fill it with trust. I give the benefit of the doubt. I'm not going to operate out of suspicion that, yeah, I knew it, he's like that, she's like that. I don't come out of that. I come out of a place of trust.
System drives behavior.
Absolutely.
We all know that. Yeah. So how do you, when I say you, I also mean now the you is expanding beyond you and the systems that you've put in place in H.I.S. How the systems in H.I.S, giving a gentle nudge or enabling a person to be proactive. Some people may be proactive and walk up when I've perhaps offended you or not lived up to my commitments that I gave you. How is that being enabled?
Right. One of the big
and sustained.
Right. The starting point, and I think a big sustainability point, is modeling. It stems out of leadership that is a perfect blend of courage and vulnerability. Yeah. If I cannot model that, right? Because I'm not a perfect being, I will create gaps. Right. It's not if, it's only a matter of when. I will create gaps. Am I humble enough to go and talk to the person I've hired as a boss and say, you know what, I'm sorry because I created that gap. Right. I want you to feel safe in the school knowing that you're not judged, that you can't reach to your boss and say that my boss, hurt my feelings or offended me. No, I will myself proactively run to it. So the system, one of the big part is modeling it. If I don't do it, they won't do it, and I can't then expect everyone to do it. So honestly, Donna and I have to first jump on that ship and then say, come on board and let's sail this way. That's one of the things. The other one is also a lot of accountability. Creating systems where there's accountability of partnerships. So one of the things we say at our school, never do anything alone. For 2 reasons. Together is always better. Yeah. The other one is, if you fail, there's someone to pick you up. Yeah. Right?
And there's organizational learning.
Yes, absolutely.
You're siphoning it back into the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, so those are 2 that come to mind.
There's an interesting phrase that pops into my head. What this is doing is, it's creating trust, and if I take it down to and safety, and if I boil that down to an action, I think it's an action, would be, you're feeling safe to do what? You're feeling safe to speak the unspeakable. And a lot of organizations, that's what's getting held back. That's what's festering and growing bigger and bigger until there's an outburst. Yes. We've jumped around quite a bit. We've talked about lots and lots of things. As we come to a close, David, if you had an opportunity to put a billboard out there where the 2 billion people in India, and maybe even outside India, were able to see that in the area of education and teachers and kids and personal brand, what message would you like to put up on that billboard?
It's a good one. I think I'll go with the first one that comes to my mind. So maybe, I would urge people to think about their purpose and their design. And are they and how are they fulfilling and walking in that invitation.
Think about your purpose and your design.
Yes. And so naturally, when you think about your purpose and your design, you don't even have to think about your personal brand. It's an outcome.
It's an outcome. Yeah.
It's a byproduct of you saying, I'm committed to the purpose that I know I have, and I'm going to do the best I can for the human flourishing.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, this earth that's so beautifully made, the central point of all that earth, while there are a lot of intricate and important pieces, it comes down to humans. This earth became the nest for humans to thrive in, right?
True.
And so if a lot of our purpose is not geared around people and one another, we're just going to get obese and inflated in ourselves, have all the wealth, money, and success and fame, and soon we'll realize, wait, I'm at the end of my life. And really, I haven't invested in things that go beyond life. And so when I talk to people and I talk about purpose, I am talking about what is it that you think you want to invest in that's going to have an undying effect, right? And the undying effect, I know, plants come and they die, right? Things exist and then they are decomposed, right? But we can establish this, that we humans are not just bodies that come and go, clearly, right? It's not just one faith, but many faith believe that if there is anything that goes beyond, right, just this life, it is the human life. And so my desire is that I am invested in the flourishing of human life, because the most eternal thing is that, right? And the infinite thing is people. So for me, finding a purpose and the design and doing it so that there's human flourishing, I think that in itself can articulate and design and frame your personal brand more than anything can. And it will happen as a byproduct, not as the intentional goal. Yeah.
In this conversation, I've been in the state of flow right through. It didn't even take time to warm up for me. It just happened. And it's been such a learning experience for me. Thank you so much for your time, David. Thank you.
Greg, been a pleasure to be on this with you and the great conversations. Thanks again.
Good conversations. Thank you.